Right. Adrian, how's your connection? Are you able to take part?
Just constant buzz in the background. Sorry about
Laptops in the room. All right, looks like Adrian might be having some challenges. So, Leah, would you mind taking us off here? Sorry, I'm sorry. A little bit of last minute scrambling. We're just starting with public comments.
So you could call the meeting. All right. Are there any public comments today?
Yep. We have one here. So take it away.
My name is George Marshall. I own a residence at 4214 Southwest Canaan. So in 2016, I asked for a permit to remove 5 trees behind my property, 4 of which were massive Doug firs. And in that request was a description of the intense winds we regularly get on this hill and an offer to plant new trees, which would reach a safe height with respect to my and my neighbor's property. The city sent out an arborist and the request was denied. During the previous storm, less than 20 yards from those trees, another Doug fir tipped over in the direction of my house. The only reason it didn't crush my bedroom is because it hit another tree. That tree had been inspected by an arborist. No arborist is capable of assessing the safety of these monstrous firs because they have no idea whether the root ball can handle the stress of the 40-mile-an-hour winds we get on our hill when applied to these massive cantilever beams, especially when they're loaded with ice. They can't. I've got 2 degrees in engineering and another certification in 3 different fields. You can't calculate it. You don't know. In the state of Washington, a homeowner can remove any tree that, if it falls, can strike their house. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is that you can't make the calculation. You can't know what's going to happen. The other is responsibility and authority are commensurate properties. If you're going to take authority, you have to be responsible. And you guys are making decisions here you can't be responsible for. I'm sure you all are familiar with the article in the Willamette Week, which details a family whose house was crushed by a tree that you stopped them from having removed. Here's a quote from the article by Brenna Bell, co-leader of the Shade Equity Coalition. Danger comes from everywhere. You can have a door from an airplane fall on your house. You just never know. A piece of aircraft falling from an airplane is a distributed risk and one that can't be mitigated. When you tell somebody that they have to have this tree next to their house, that's not a distributed risk. That's a specific risk. And you're telling them you have to deal with it. No one was in my house but my family watching chunks of these trees break off and hit our roof. No one was there but us. Now, the owner of the house, Joel Bond, that was crushed by the tree that you disallowed him from removing after it smashed through the roof like a dull knife trying to cut through a tomato, quote unquote, found his daughter, JoJo, covered in dust from the tree crashing the roof in their bedroom. It barely missed the Bond's 6-year-old daughter, JoJo. Now, if you're lucky, this guy's from California and he only does is sue the city. If he's from Alabama, you may have a different problem on your hand. I would sit up at night worrying about it if I were you. So let me be clear. We in our neighborhood are going to protect our family and we're going to protect our property. And the city code should be changed so that whenever a citizen thinks his or her safety is at risk from a tree, they should be able to remove it. Next time, you might not be so lucky. JoJo might not make it out alive. And what are you going to say to that? What's going to be your response? It's probably going to happen. Until you make the change to this ordinance, I recommend you either stop making decisions or make sure the that you always make decision in the favor of the homeowner. Any questions?
So what would you recommend? What would you like to see?
If a homeowner wants to remove a tree because they think it's unsafe, they should be able to remove it. And you can have them plant another tree. And you can set a minimum height. So they don't plant a little sapling, and try to cheat the code.
And what do you think would be the long-term consequences of that policy for the city?
You mean in terms of like the urban canopy?
In terms of the city itself, the quality of life in the city?
I think it would be fine. I mean, the urban canopy is not going anywhere because people can't even afford to remove these trees. That's one reason why the Oregonian came out against this ordinance when it was first passed.
Okay. I think the consequences of what you're calling for. So in a particular house that may be here 100 years, we'll say, it's in good condition. And it may have maybe minimum of 5 different property owners. Any one of those property owners might decide that a tree is dangerous. And the property owners that come after that won't have that decision to make because the tree won't be gone. So I think people's perception of danger is a very personal thing. It really varies. Some people don't drive a car because they think 50, 60,000 people killed a year from cars is an unacceptable risk. A lot of people do drive cars. Some people won't live in a place where there are any trees.
But it's their choice. They have the choice to drive the car or not. You're imposing this choice on somebody in their house.
I can buy a car or not buy a car. I can buy a particular property or not buy it. That's my choice. If I have the money, that is.
I do see that Commissioner Meisner has his hand raised. So make sure he gets an opportunity to respond, and then we do need to move on to the next agenda item.
Well, thank you. I'm leaving my camera off just because I'm pretty sick, so that's why I'm keeping my camera off. First, I'd like to thank, sorry, I missed your name, but I'd like to thank you for coming to speak at the public comment section of the meeting. So like I'm not an arborist, but I work in public accounting and a majority of my job is doing risk assessments. And when we do our risk assessments in accounting, or especially specifically auditing, we have to look at not just the risk of a tree failing, but the risk around the impact of a failure. Sorry, sick brain fog. What I mean is when we're looking at like the potential for something to go wrong when we're doing our financial audit, we don't look at just the risk of something going wrong. We have to look at the impact. And in that, when we're doing our financial audit, we have to look at the size of accounts. And I think that is where there is a room for improvement with urban forestry's risk assessments. Is that as far as I know, urban forestry is only looking at the risk of a tree failing and not looking at the impact. Because at the end of the day, the impact of a tree failure is what people care about, not necessarily if a tree fails. And if I, as an auditor, didn't take size into account when doing a risk assessment, I would lose my license, possibly end up in jail, and my company would be sued for negligence and go bankrupt. And it's a little, I'm just, based on things I've been said over the last couple of meetings around the winter storm, it's a little upsetting that there hasn't been any sort of responsibility taken or like accountability for potential failings of the policy with removing trees. Instead, I've heard essentially leadership just being defensive and then trying to shift blame. And I know it was brought up last meeting, but I think it would be important in a future meeting that we discuss the risk assessment process for urban forestry.
I don't know
Thank you.
what situation in which you could assess the risk and say the tree was going to crush the house that you would then say it's worth the risk.
If I can speak a little bit, there is, appreciate, first off, your public comment on this. Appreciate you coming down here. Appreciate Justin Meisner doing risk assessment, or Commissioner Meisner doing risk assessments as well, but the city does have a risk assessment protocol. I'm a risk assessment qualified arborist, so is Jim. He's one of our tree inspectors. So what Commissioner Meisner has said is pretty false in the sense that in terms of risk, you look at the tree, the potential of it failing, and the consequences of that failure. You add all of that up. We don't take into size into account because that takes a qualitative and quantitative assessment and puts it together. And you can't do that. That creates a false thing. The entire risk assessment around trees is a really large conversation that we could definitely have. I don't think we have time for that at this moment based on this comment. But when it does come up again, I think you should come back and we could have that conversation in a larger sense. We could have City Forester Cairo bring in the city managers that deal with this risk because it's not only an individual tree, but it's over an entire forest system as well.
I'm going to ask one last question, then I'm going to let you guys move on because I know you only allocated 5 minutes for this. The tree that toppled next to our place, it looked perfectly healthy. And like I said, it had been checked out by an arborist. Mm-hmm. These root balls, there's just no way to know how strong they are. And even if you knew what the mechanical connection is, you can't do a calculation on how much, whether a certain amount of wind with a certain amount of ice is going to topple them over. There's just no way. I don't know what an assessment of that would be, but you're an arborist. Mm-hmm. So what is that assessment? I mean, you can't do a calculation.
Again, we'll have to talk about that another time. We don't have enough time to get into the entire tree risk assessment qualification for arborists. But it is a good question.
I would do something about this, guys. If it's not keeping you up at night, you're not thinking enough about it. Somebody's daughter gets crushed in some house because of some tree you told them they had to leave next to the house. I don't even know what that looks like.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your comments.
All right, is nobody else, I think?
Yeah, that was it, yeah.
City Forester report?
Thank you.
Good morning, commissioners. I have 6 items for you. Brian, I'll ask you to keep me on track with time. First up, I wanted to acknowledge Commissioner and Co-Chair Roberta Jortner's service. As you all know, Roberta has stepped down from her role and isn't here today. First meeting that we don't have Roberta. You know, Roberta noted that she's been involved with trees and other aspects of planning in Portland for 27 years. And that includes serving as city staff and as the lead planner to write Title 11, the tree code, which was quite a huge piece of work and hadn't existed prior. And finally, I guess we could say Roberta's really retiring because, of course, as a commissioner and her other volunteer roles after she left her paid work, she's been very active. So I wanted to express how much I really appreciate and thank Commissioner Jortner for her Urban Forestry Commission service, as well as her years of work for and about nature, trees, affordable housing, urban design, and so many other aspects of Portland as the place we all live. My second item, continuing from the first, and so we've begun the process for recruiting for the vacant commission seat. And that starts by Urban Forestry, specifically Brian Lando, working with the Office of Civic Life through the process that all city advisory bodies use to advertise for interested folks to submit applications. So commissioners, I'll ask for you all to think about people who might be interested and would improve the Urban Forestry Commission as a group working together and in its advisory capacity to the city. Including, if you could think about those who could help the commission represent all Portlanders, including historically marginalized communities and values, and who have some urban tree policy and public policy knowledge. We will email you with the application link once it's open and would encourage you at that time to share it with folks who might be interested. The more applications, the better. And that we expect that process will take a few months, typically does. My third item, I wanted to give some updates on recent partner and community forestry events in the city and also some upcoming events like that. So our tree summit was held on March 2nd at Riegler Elementary School. And that included some information tables, a lunch for everyone, tree walks with especially impressive participation given there was driving rain at the time and there had been snow earlier that day. It was truly March weather. We had also a lot of conversation and connections were made, and there were presentations on the current street tree inventory project, updating our inventory. The Connecting Canopies Coalition, one of our partners, gave a presentation. Portland Clean Energy Fund's Equitable Tree Canopy Program was also presented. And the keynote speaker and former Urban Forestry Commissioner was Ed Washington. Mr. Washington got a standing ovation for his comments. There's information about the summit on our website. I will put a link in the chat after my report if you want to look at it. I wanted to thank Commissioners Lilly and Nelson for participating in the summit, and Commissioner Nelson for leading a tree walk and helping all the other tree walk leaders prepare, as well as for his years of work creating and caring for the Riegler School Arboretum, which is quite impressive. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a trip. Another community event announcement, reminder, I guess is a proper way to say it. March 23rd is the rescheduled Dr. Martin Luther King Day of Service event. That'll be at Lentz Park. That is in partnership with Green Lentz. Director Long, Commissioner Ryan, and State Representative Confam will be in attendance, and I will put the link to sign up if you'd like to volunteer for the event in the chat after. Fourth item, germane to the public comment today, is a little bit of a update on the January 12th storm response. You've heard about this in previous meetings from me and Brian, I think last month. So where we're at now is cleanup from the event, both physical and regulatory, is nearing completion, still not quite done. Thanks to the recently new resources from the Parks Levy, it's taken weeks rather than months to get to this point, responding to an event of this size. So that's a really remarkable change. I want to recognize our team and the city team, the broader team outside of urban forestry that we work with for their remarkable efforts. And I'd like to underscore 3 aspects of that storm response for you now. The first of those is that event highlighted the need for quality tree care so that incorrect practices that weaken trees are avoided and hazardous trees are removed in a timely fashion. Part of the regulatory role that we have and in the city's tree code is that dead, dying, and dangerous trees are permitted for removal. When they're inspected, if they have those qualities, they are permitted for removal. And in some cases, indeed, we have to require removal when it's a public safety risk. Hopefully, we'll be able to say in the near future that we'll have better care of street trees because of prospective funding for them to be maintained routinely. With the new park tree maintenance program, which you've heard about before, we expect that our park trees will be safer and live longer. And hopefully at some point we'll have more support for private property tree care in the not too distant future. I wanted to also say that one purpose of our tree regulations and permitting is indeed public safety. And none of us want to see any of our staff or arborists in the city, I'm sure, want to see tragic events happen and failures of trees happen. And with qualified folks involved inspecting trees, a lot can be done to avoid those situations. Second item related to the storm. To respond as quickly as possible to the emergency requests that came in, Urban Forestry reorganized our team's roles. For example, some of the tree inspectors who normally aren't involved directly in emergency response shifted over to do that site assessment. So they were called out along with our arborists. That meant we could go to more places quicker, respond more quickly, and address emergency requests much faster. Some other staff in the permitting and regulation team who have more flexible roles in general were also shifted over to help our operations team for a period of time. And also some recent temporary staff joined the operations team to help with storm response. So those were, it was helpful that we were able to have that flexibility. That does mean though that when we move people from one role into another, the role they left is no longer being performed, so we can't do it for long, or we're not performing all those other services. So in the long run, that's a challenge that we really need to address, and we're working on that. Third and lastly, about the storm response, because of the mayor's emergency declaration, we were able to expedite certain city processes and receive approval to acquire software. We've sought tree asset and management software for many years, and it has been funded by the Parks Levy. However, we've been in a process to actually get permission to start using the software. So we now have that permission, which is great. And I want to thank our tree maintenance operations manager, Paul Anderson, who led that effort during the storm. Once implemented, that software will improve efficiency and our ability to more effectively manage forests. And if you want to check it out online, it's called Planet Geo Tree Plotter. Poke around in our demo and see what it is. It lets us track activities, regulations, care by tree, which we do not have the capacity to do with right now. I'll take a break there. I have a couple more items if there's time, just to see if there's any questions on those things.
I do have a question. I'm excited about this software because I think one of the concerns about the storm was that some healthy trees did come down where there wasn't really a great way to have known, like if they would have been assessed, kind of like what our comment had said.
Yeah.
Do we have, I think this has been asked before, and I know the answer was it's a little crazy right now. It's worked, like everybody's working as hard as I can. Has any data emerged on that as far as healthy trees coming down versus diseased trees, where and it sounds like the software in the future will help us answer that question better if there's a really unusual weather event like this.
Yeah, good question. Yes, the software will help. The software will not enable us to do that thoroughly, and we can't now either. Reason being, there's 4.2 million trees in the city, and you're in urban forestry is involved when regulations are involved. And so that's really the only time that we're going to have that individual tree information, unless we're doing inventories as well. Still, that won't be the complete picture. Also, our folks, when they're going out to address a tree emergency, they're really focused on addressing the emergency, mitigating, and there's not really a way to do an assessment of causation. I think we all try to do that, but it's a little bit different task. We don't have a way to capture it. We don't have a way to sort it. Will the software help with that? Potentially, we'll have to see. I think my own experience with the storm, there were trees that failed that we wouldn't have expected would fail. There were also a lot of trees that failed for reasons that seemed pretty apparent in my own experience, and I'll only speak to my own experience.
I think what's really, even though it's a subset that would give us some data that we can use to better informed decisions. So I think that's really exciting. And I hope the public can hear about that, because I know there's a lot of people who feel like our public comment today about feeling out of control with, you know, what to do about a tree that you're worried about.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be helpful for people to understand that like there is a move in that direction to be better, have better data about tree failures in the future. And with those caveats that it's not always possible to know 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that comment. Yeah, and I'm hopeful that maybe we can get into that a little more. I'll move on to my,
Commissioner Vandermark.
yes, Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, thank you all. I had a question and then maybe two questions or three. I'll try to be succinct though. One was just wondering if we're doing anything else to recognize Roberta. Roberta has been I like feel the loss of her policy expertise. So I didn't know if there was just more beyond recognizing it here. So that was a question. I did email, I know it was just this morning, but Brian, about having the policy committee an overview on an upcoming agenda so we can talk to everybody about what we do and hopefully recruit some of you to be more involved. Roberta's leaving is, for those that have been involved, is huge. Like Roberta did a lot for us on the policy committee, and I'm very aware of that departure. And then the third thing was just based on some of this conversation, I think it might be helpful, like Casey, to your comments, to talk about track certification and let folks know that there is qualifications and that process maybe more. Like I know about this, Casey, you do. I know actually both Caseys that are here. But like, I think sometimes it's easy to make assumptions without having context and what some of the processes are. So I think helpful giving some more context about what that be at a future meeting, I think could be really helpful. So
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Vandermark. I'm going to complete my report so we stay on track. We have Commissioner Vandermark's request for time at the next meeting. So we'll go over that with the chairs about the policy committee. In regards to recognizing Commissioner Jortner, I'll just mention that we do have the Bill NATO Awards, if someone wanted to nominate appropriate people. And my next item is to give you an update on the Portland Urban Forest Plan Update Project. The Community Advisory Committee has met a few times. Their last meeting was on March 6th to discuss tree equity. That included discussing what equity means, how canopy is distributed in Portland, barriers to preserving, planting, and caring for trees, and the types of places it's important for the CAC members to have trees, their opinions on that. They also started talking about the plan's vision and goals, and creating the vision and goals for the plan will be the next meeting's focus. Community Advisory Committee agendas and summaries are posted on the project website if you want to learn more about the details. And there are two key ways for everyone to get involved in the project this spring. So please share the information I'm about to give you with your networks. The first of those is there will be an open house on April 24th at McDaniel High School from 5 to 7:30 p.m. Also, the second item, the project survey goes live on March 25th. It'll be open until May 2nd. So hopefully a long window to collect a lot of input. That information is also on the project website. So please share that around with everyone. Oh, and Brian has it in the chat, with everyone you think could be interested. The project team's looking forward to giving a longer update at the April meeting for you all. And my last item for you is an update on the natural resource delivery project. As you've hopefully seen in email and was discussed at last month's meeting, the city bureaus involved in this work will be convening a workshop to provide more opportunity for involvement by the Forestry Commission, the Parks Board, and the Portland Utility Board. The next workshop meeting is this Friday, tomorrow, and I wanted to recognize and thank Commissioners Iheanacho and Lilly for being the representatives for the commission to that project. That concludes my report.
Great, so moving forward to heritage tree removal requests.
Point of order. I don't know if there's going to be any public testimony on the request to remove heritage trees.
There will.
197 and 273. Any public testimony in opposition to the removal, or don't know?
No one submitted any, but since removals do require a public hearing before we vote, we should allow anyone who's in attendance to provide.
What I would like to request is that we take the public testimony before we hear Sam's presentation, and then Urban Forestry Commission approve the removal of these 2 heritage trees. The justification for that is we should save 20 minutes of agenda time, and we can use that agenda item time on the next items that are more controversial potentially. So just a suggestion is to try how to free up a block of time.
Sorry, I think I'm not understanding. You said you want to take public comment on the trees before the presentation?
Yes.
I just think that wouldn't give anyone the ability to know what they're commenting on before we present what the removal situations are.
I agree, but we run into a shortage of time for discussions in our meetings repeatedly. And it's hard for me to believe that there's any controversy on the removal of these, but maybe the public has other.
Yeah, we have the full next hour and a half for
all right,
the 2 heritage items. So we did try to account for often our discussions go along, and so we want to make sure we have enough time for it. I just want people to be able to know what they're commenting on.
Just a suggestion.
Thanks. All right, but yeah, Sam's gonna take it from here. But yeah, just to clarify that this will be a public hearing because code requires that for when approving the removal of a heritage tree. That I will share my screen so for the presentation that Sam has.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Wolf. I'm a botanics specialist in Urban Forestry Science and Policy Work Group. I'm the manager of our Heritage Tree program, and we have 2 separate presentations today. This first presentation will cover heritage tree removal requests, followed by a UFC hearing and vote. My next presentation will cover heritage tree nominations and emergency removals. We have a few heritage tree items on our agenda today, and I'll be assisted by Jim Field and Corey Knobloch, who are both urban forestry non-development tree inspectors. Next slide. Okay, today we'll begin with a brief overview of the heritage tree removal process before discussing the 2 removal requests. To ensure clear consideration of each tree, we'll conduct 2 rounds of UFC discussion, public hearing, and voting, 1 round for each tree. And the first tree removal request is presented by Jim Field, who will discuss heritage tree 197. And the next tree is presented by Corey Knobloch, who will discuss heritage tree 273. Next slide. So a little background, heritage trees are recognized by their size, age, historical association, or horticultural value, and they are of special importance to the city. They're designated by city council and are required to be preserved, and they are considered to have the greatest protection a city can have in Portland. All right, like many living things, however, heritage trees decline over time. Due to their size and location, physical removal of the tree may be necessary. There are 2 scenarios described in Title 11 about removal. Subsection F describes the process of heritage tree removals during non-emergency situations, and subsection I refers to the emergencies. This presentation will follow subsection F, where there are 2 property owners have requested consent from the USC to remove their heritage trees. In this process, the UFC shall hold a public hearing on each request and then vote for or against the removal. Again, consent to remove shall be supported by at least 6 members of the UFC. Next. So we will now present the 2 removal requests for your consideration. I will introduce each one, and the tree inspector who reviewed each case will present their findings. The UFC will have opportunity to discuss, hear public comment, and vote after each presentation. This map illustrates the location of both Heritage Tree 197 and Heritage Tree 273. Both trees are located on private property, and the property owners are requesting removal based on the condition of their trees. The map indicates the concentration of heritage trees in each neighborhood. So the darker the color, the more heritage trees. Heritage Tree 197 is in the Woodstock neighborhood in the southeast, and Heritage Tree 273 is located in the Elliott neighborhood in the northeast. Now I'll pass it over to Jim Field to present on the first heritage tree removal request.
Good morning. So I'm here to talk about Heritage Tree 197, Pinus monophylla, single needle pinyon pine. It was designated in 1998. The DBH is approximately 16-inch, very rare in Portland. This particular tree, the seed of for this tree was collected in Rockland, Nevada by author Lambert Florin. It was planted here at what used to be his Portland home at 5527 Southeast Tolman Street. This tree is located on private property. Next slide, please. So the 2011 picture, about the best picture I could find on Google Street View of how the tree looked. The one on the right, 2024, is a photo that I took. So you can see quite a bit of decline there. And it's been declining over a few years. Next slide, please. The tree health inspection submittal came January 16th, 2024, after that wind and ice storm. The health inspection I completed on January 31st of this year. And I determined that the tree was in severe decline and qualified as dying. Talked to the property owner about it, suggested they submit a removal request, which they did on February 13th, 2024. Next slide, please. So this Pinus monophylla is in poor condition, decline with less than 5% live canopy. The northwest subcondominant leader had failed during that storm, and remaining southeast subcondominant leader has been compromised, is now prone to failure. There is a close-up on the following slide. Slide, please. So there's another picture I took of that compromised leader. So about 50% of the circumference had been compromised. So now it's kind of leaning a little, well, yeah, it's not good. Next slide, please. So pruning options, if they were to remove the dead wood and that compromised leader, it would leave approximately 1% live crown ratio or less. And it's actually the red triangle up on the upper right. There's kind of a block in front of it there. So that's what would be left of the tree after crown cleaning and mitigation the risk. So at that point, I don't think the tree would be able to adequately photosynthesize and be able to maintain this longevity. Next slide, please. So the heritage tree 197 is advanced decline and is dying. Title 11, Chapter 1180, definitions and measurements define a dying tree as a tree in advanced state of decline because it's diseased, infested by insects, or rotting, and cannot be saved by reasonable treatment or pruning, or must be removed to spread the infestation or disease to other trees, or is imminently likely to become a danger or die. So the photos that I took I didn't take any pictures of this root flare or surrounding areas. I really didn't have concerns with that as much as how much canopy decline there was. And that compromised subcadominant leader, removing that, I don't think the tree would be viable after that pruning.
There's a typo, right?
Yeah, the word prevent is meant to be in there.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
that's what I
was. I stuttered right there. But
So let's keep it.
Okay, next, oh, it's still going on, okay. I think this goes back to you now, don't it?
No, this is you.
This is me,
Your
okay.
recommendation.
If Urban Forestry, UF recommends approving removal of heritage tree 197, UF inspection confirms the tree is in advanced state of decline and is dying.
Thank you, Jim. I'll pass it over to the chair now to facilitate UFC discussion, hear public comment, and then the UFC may vote to approve or deny this removal request. Let me know if there's any questions.
Is there a public comment?
Yeah, if anyone is attending and wants to raise their hand to provide comment, they can do that now. I don't see any, so I think we're good.
I move that we remove this tree. Though it breaks my heart, it's such a unique tree, but it's dead. And I think it's very clear that the tree is not able to be retained even with pruning and management. So I move that we remove the tree from the heritage tree list.
Also very close to the homeowners group. Yeah, so, yeah, I second. All in favor? That we remove.
Let's see. All three here, and looks like all others in attendance, all other commissioners have also concurred.
One.
And JR. So, okay. It was unanimous.
We have 6. Great, thank you. Next, okay, going back to our agenda, now we'll cover Heritage Tree 273. And I'll pass it on to Corey Nublock to present. Corey is virtual today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Corey. I'm a tree inspector at the City of Portland. So yeah, we'll be going over Heritage Tree 273. Heritage Tree 273 is a monkey puzzle tree. It was designated in 2005. The DBH of 36 inches. It's relatively common in Portland. And currently there are 3 monkey puzzle heritage trees total in the city of Portland. In 1905, the Lewis and Clark expedition gave away monkey puzzle seedlings in Portland, which is why many are of similar size in the area. So this tree is located at 446 Northeast Fargo Street, and it is a private tree. Next slide, please. Here we have 2 side-by-side photos of the tree over time. The slide on the left is from 2015, and you can see a relatively green full crown. And in 2024, this photo was taken very recently. A majority of the crown is browned out, and the tree is in severe decline. Next slide, please. So a bit of the timeline with the tree here. Property owners submitted both a tree health inspection and removal request on January 16th, right after the severe wind and ice storm that we had in Portland. Health inspections were completed around January 31st, and UF determined tree was in decline and qualifies as dying. And here we have a photo of 2019 versus 2023. So very good comparison showing the extreme browning out of the crown of the tree. So we've determined that this tree is standing dead. There's less than 5% green foliage in the tree's crown, And sadly, the tree has lost the ability to photosynthesize. Next slide, please. So our assessment, heritage tree number 273 is in an advanced state of decline and is dying. Title 11 defines dying tree as a tree in advanced state of decline because it's diseased, infested, and cannot be saved. Next slide, please. And so our recommendation would be approving removal of heritage tree 273. And UF inspections confirm the tree is in advanced state of decline and is dying. Thank you.
Public comment for this one?
I don't see anyone raising their hand, so no public comments.
I don't have experience with monkey puzzle trees, except I don't want to ever be in one. But as a broadleaf evergreen, is there any chance that it's going to regrow foliage on those branches that have all the dead foliage on them now? I'm assuming before the ice, it looked fine. I don't know that.
Well, I spoke to the homeowner and he said it had been completely brown since July.
Oh, all right. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
In addition to that, the most trees in the Arcariaceae family lose their entire limbs and branches. They die off entirely. So it's unlike things in the pine family where they lose a needle here, lose a needle there, and they can regrow. Arcariaceae tends to lose entire branches, dehisces entirely. So I would expect the only way this tree to survive is if everything was removed to reduce the risk, and then that one sprig that's still alive rebuilds the canopy. And the odds of that happening in a species that doesn't really prefer this kind of soil to begin with, I just don't see that happening.
Questions from commissioners?
Move to remove the tree. Heritage tree 273. Yes.
I second that.
All in favor?
Everyone's got their hand raised.
Any opposed?
So that was also unanimous.
Great.
Great, thank you all. We'll move forward with this decision and inform the property owners. And now we'll switch over to heritage tree nominations, new designation requests, and requests for delisting or the removal designation. Thank you. All right. Hello again. This presentation will cover the Heritage Tree Program updates, nominations, emergency removals, and lastly, requests for Heritage Tree designations and delistings. And in this presentation, I'll begin with a brief overview of the program, report on program activities from last year. Then we'll review your slate of Heritage Tree nominations, followed by requests for new designations. Lastly, we'll cover Heritage Tree designation removals or delistings due to emergency removal or removal requests. So heritage trees have been formally recognized by City Council for their unique size, age, historical, or horticultural significance. And then once accepted by Council, heritage trees are designated with a plaque. They're listed in our heritage tree database, and most importantly, they receive the highest protection of any tree in the city. They must be preserved, and there is a steep penalty for unauthorized removal, damage, or injury. Next slide. So in 2022, emerald ash borer, or EAB, which is an invasive pest, was discovered in Forest Grove. It's a voracious insect that harms ash trees. So to protect our 2 heritage ash trees, urban forestry staff have inoculated them with an improved injection pesticide as a preventative measure against EAP. Both trees are located in the right-of-way, and urban forestry informed the adjacent property owners in advance. Urban Forestry Science Outreach and Planting Work Group oversees the Heritage Tree Program, and my role is the program manager. I coordinate Heritage Tree Committee activities and meetings. I inform the UFC of program updates and requests. I manage the nominations, communicate with property owners, manage program files, website content, and more. But though there's much to manage on my end, all of urban forestry work groups are involved in administration of the program. Tree inspectors conduct inspections and issue permits. The operations work group is involved with maintenance and emergency removals of heritage trees in the right-of-way and on city property. Currently, there are 324 active heritage trees, and 7 were lost either due to failure or mortality. In 2023, the Heritage Tree Committee assisted the program by reviewing 87 nominations, providing recommendations to the UFC. They also nominated a number of the potential heritage trees. They also provided education and outreach during heritage tree walks and tabling during the Arbor Day event. Of special note from this year is the recognition of Phyllis Reynolds by the State Heritage Tree Program for a Lifetime Achievement Award. Phyllis was a founding member of the Portland Heritage Tree Committee. She also served as an urban forestry commissioner and is a close friend to Hoyt Arboretum. She was nominated by the Portland Heritage Tree Committee for her work as a leader, author, and researcher of heritage trees. A celebration and award presentation will be hosted by staff at Hoyt Arboretum next month. We will invite the UFC. Next. Now we'll review the 5 trees that have been nominated to become heritage trees this year. The Heritage Tree Committee has reviewed the nominated trees and recommended this list for you. Before introducing our new trees, a little disclaimer that none of these photos fully capture the wonder of the trees, and I encourage you to go take a visit and seek them out for yourself. But here's a snapshot of the 5 recommended new trees. Of these trees, 3 are on private property and 2 are in the right-of-way. And 2 of these nominations bring heritage trees into neighborhoods that currently have 2 or fewer heritage trees. Our first tree is a copper beech located in unimproved right-of-way in the Montevilla neighborhood, east of 82nd Avenue. It is adjacent to Clark Elementary School and its Learning Landscapes installation. For those who are curious, Urban Forestry's Learning Landscape program empowers students of all ages to plant trees for their school and with support of a professional urban forestry team. Along with the environmental benefits, the planted trees serve as a living learning landscape for educators to teach science, math, and more. So this nominated heritage tree would support Clark Elementary's learning landscape. This tree is about 36 inches and is located near Southeast 89th Avenue and Southeast Main Street. There are 2 other heritage trees in this neighborhood, including Heritage Tree 373, that is also a copper beech. Right now, this neighborhood does not have many heritage trees and fewer are present east of 82nd Avenue. So this tree meets the requirements of size, age, beauty, and shade. Next tree. Next tree is also located in the Montevilla neighborhood near Southeast 88th Avenue in Burnside. It is a western red cedar in a backyard, but it can be easily seen from the street. The size of the tree is within ranges of current heritage western red cedars and is well cared for by the landowner. Western red cedars are culturally significant trees for indigenous people of the region, and there are currently 3 western red cedars still listed. This tree meets the heritage requirements of size, age, beauty, shade, and horticultural value. Next slide. All right, this next tree is majestic. It's an American sycamore in the right-of-way. It has a robust canopy shading the width of the street. It's located in the Northwest District near Wallace Park. So the Northwest District currently has 11 heritage trees. However, American sycamore heritage trees have become rare as we've lost a number in recent years. So there are only 2 American sycamores currently designated. This tree meets the heritage tree requirements of size, age, beauty, shade, and horticultural value in that case. All right. The next is a tulip tree located in Eastmoreland neighborhood. It's located in the backyard of a residence on the corner of Southeast Carlton Street and Southeast 28th Avenue, just east of the Eastmoreland Golf Course. In addition to beauty and shade, this tree is 100 years old this year, as it was planted during the construction of the home in 1940. It's easily seen and appreciated from the street. It meets all the requirements of a heritage tree. Next slide. And this last tree is an Oregon white oak located in the Selwood neighborhood. It's of similar size to those currently designated. There are currently 19 active Oregon white oaks in the program after we lost 2 during the ice storm. Oregon white oaks are culturally relevant species to local indigenous people and a cornerstone of the Willamette Valley habitat. There are currently 12 heritage trees in this neighborhood. This tree meets the requirements of size, age, beauty, shade, and horticultural value. Next. So this morning, we covered the removal requests of heritage trees that were dying but not dangerous. But now I'll cover the emergency heritage tree removals, trees that were too dangerous to remain in place or have failed. Since the summer of 2023 through this winter, the Heritage Tree Program experienced 5 emergency removals in 5 different locations. Tree conditions varied, but all were evaluated by our urban forestry tree inspectors and considered to be a hazard to the public. Next. Next. There we go. And my earlier presentation covered the 2 removal options described in Title 11. Subsection F refers to non-emergency, but this code section I covers emergencies, and we'll be following that code for the next few trees. And in these situations, the city forester may order trees to be removed without prior UFC consent. All right. So this first tree was the only heritage willow tree designated. It's located in the front yard of a residence in the Boyce neighborhood. It was experiencing large branch failures recently, and the top canopy had died back. The property owner submitted a permit application for removal, and urban forestry tree inspector observed severe rot in the main trunk. In the left image, you can see a 5-foot probe pushed into the trunk. Given its severe decline, size, and proximity to the right-of-way, urban forestry approved emergency removal. And with the removal of this tree, the Boyce neighborhood is down to 1 heritage tree, a copper beech, number 312. This is one of 2 Oregon white oaks that failed during the ice storm. Heritage tree 23 was located in the front yard of a residence in Selwood. Urban forestry approved the emergency removal in January, and crews cleared the right-of-way. This neighborhood now has 11 heritage trees. Heritage tree 143 was an Oregon white oak located in the historic Dosh Park Estate in Hillsdale neighborhood. Also failed during the ice storm. It was removed by a local tree care provider. And this neighborhood also has 11 heritage trees remaining. Okay. The tree techs received numerous calls about heritage tree 90 over the years due to falling limbs and branches. Urban forestry arborists responded and performed pruning work. During this pruning work, an arborist identified several deep cavities in the unions of tall leaders, as well as included bark and dead wood in the trunk. The second photo is looking into a 6-foot deep cavity where a family of raccoons were nesting. That's what that little white dot is. After confirming the dangerous condition with the city forester, urban forestry informed adjacent property owner before removing the tree. So this neighborhood now has 6 heritage trees. Heritage tree 181 was the only Coulter pine heritage tree. It was observed standing dead last summer. And due to its size and location in the right-of-way, urban forestry crews removed the tree as an emergency removal in October. This neighborhood now has 7 heritage trees remaining. Now I will cover requests for recommendations to City Council regarding designations. So the text from Title 11 discusses the process for designation, and it guides the UFC on the process of how to designate new trees, heritage trees. To designate a new heritage tree, the UFC makes a recommendation to City Council. And a recommendation to designate shall be supported by at least 6 members of the UFC. Then City Council may vote to designate the tree. Next slide. Right. This map illustrates the extent of some of the nominations as noted with an orange dot. We had many nominations clustered on the east side, with some to the far east, past 82nd Avenue, and one in the far north. Of those nominated, the yellow stars indicate trees that were reviewed and recommended by all members of the Heritage Tree Committee, which includes tree inspectors and community volunteers. These trees are recommended for heritage tree designation. The red X's indicate trees that were recommended for designation removal or delisting. Yes. All right, now I'll pass it over to the chair to facilitate discussion on new heritage tree designations.
Sam, I'm sorry if I missed this in the presentation, but could you explain for the trees that have been proposed for designation on private property, are the property owners involved in that? What does that look like?
Yes, private property owners are involved. So they have to sign a number of documents during the process. They sign a nomination form to even be considered as a nomination. Then once they've been approved by the Heritage Tree Committee to move forward, they have to sign a deed consent form, which basically recognizes the heritage tree on their property as a part of this program. And that means they have to sign a form provided by Urban Forestry that is signed and notarized, and then it's moves through the nomination processes, which includes Urban Forestry Commission approval to recommend nomination to the City Council. And then once City Council approves the nomination and it becomes a formally recognized heritage tree, we then go and record those deed consent forms with the county. Does that answer the question?
That does. So private property owners, we will not propose trees to the commission for designation unless the private property owner themselves wants that to happen, and it will get entered in their deed. Thanks.
So all the private trees that have been nominated have signed consent forms in hand.
For the trees that there were nominations, but they weren't recommended, what are the usual reasons why?
So the first pass is condition of the tree, if it's in poor health, if the root zones and the canopy area will not have enough room to grow in perpetuity, so that can exclude it. And then other reasons to exclude a tree may be it's not big enough in comparison to those already designated. And usually it was size, that they're nice, lovely, healthy trees. So either the condition was bad or it wasn't big enough yet.
It's interesting to think about. I was just noticing, just thinking about which neighborhoods have bigger trees, and is that something the commission wants to think about in terms of, East Portland might always be at a disadvantage if there's fewer. I know there are big trees in East Portland, but there aren't as many as in the west side, and so is that something we'd want to rethink for the potential of a future large tree in that place?
It is a focus of the Heritage Tree Committee to explore more of the east side and to find to focus nominations there.
This is continuing on what Jen was asking about. Because of issues that arose last year. It's really important that the private property deed have wording on it that says there is a heritage tree there. And I wondered, how are you doing in terms of the existing heritage trees on private property? How many of them currently have language on their deeds that says there is a heritage tree there? I've heard that that's very hard to track. I don't know anything that's involved with it, but I had heard that was a stumbling block in the past. Then I've also heard it is not a stumbling block. So I'd like to know, because I don't want to ever be in the predicament that we were in last year, regardless of the decision that was made. It was a tremendous use of resources because there was nothing on private deeds. So is that rectified? Is it a work in progress? Where are we at?
Well, we are in progress. It's so right now, all the new heritage tree nominations that are moving forward are documented on deeds. And so that should be avoided in the future. And as for those heritage trees that were inducted into the program before that policy was instituted, is a project that we're working on.
So it's a what?
We're working on that.
So I would really appreciate if we get a progress report a year from now as to how many of those private property heritage trees have it on the deed, because I'm inclined to not approve anything for a private property unless we've got written from the property owner that it's going on the deed, because it's just not worth it. It's not worth it at all. And I know from talking with people who are involved in the Heritage Tree Committee, they put a lot of time and energy into this. And so they're certainly highly invested in having those private trees part of the property. But properties change ownership, and the ownership in the future may not feel the same way as the existing private property owner. And so we lose the tree. So I want proof that it's happened. I don't want just good intentions. I want proof.
Thank you for the comments, Commissioner Nelson. I would agree with that. That is why we instituted having those property owners sign the form so that we can then send it to the county and have it listed on the deed. As Sam mentioned years ago, that wasn't a practice pre all of us here, I believe. It was requested that property owners do that. And those property owners also wanted their trees listed, otherwise they wouldn't have come forward. But we figured that doing that with the county, people forgot or that sort of thing, which is why we have a different process now. So again, all the trees that are in front of you today for your consideration, the property owners have signed that form and it will get submitted after and provided the council does list the trees. As far as the ones that are the trees that were designated before that policy, I think we do have a number for how many. Do you know it off the top of your head?
Of those
Sam?
currently designated that have deeds, or those that are undesignated? Designated but no deeds. Designated but no deeds is 131.
131.
Are private, but we don't know if it's on the deed or not.
No, we do know it's not on the deed.
Oh, it's not on.
And that Sam had said that's a work in progress. We are looking at what should we do with those, and that is a work in progress. And when we have some ideas of how to handle it, it will come back to the commission for you all to hear about.
Okay, because that's potentially 131 property owners coming to us.
That's right.
Yep. Okay.
Commissioner Meisner has a question.
Hi. First, I would just want to thank Forester Cairo for her question, as well as the comments and questions from the other commissioners. To kind of follow up on regarding the disclosures for the private property owner sign, do those disclosures include anything around like the extra regulations around heritage trees? Because similar to Commissioner Nelson, my concern is that the property owners might come back to us later and say that they weren't made aware of all the regulations associated with heritage trees, and that essentially that they felt the process was unfair, or that they regret their decision.
So the current deed form that they sign does illustrate the requirements of being a heritage tree owner. And it outlines the requirements of procuring a permit from urban forestry before conducting any tree work. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, like, is that it, or does it include like all the other protections around heritage trees? Like, I guess my question is, what are the private property owners made aware of?
So they're
Like,
made aware of during conversation when we are considering nomination of all the kind of limitations that go along with a heritage tree in terms of what tree work they can do on their own or what they can do with authorization. So a lot of that detail work is done in personal conversation and over emails with the landowner. The deed form that they sign doesn't go into all that strict detail. But this whole project of integrating private property trees into getting them signed onto deeds is also going to work on improving outreach and information to the landowners more readily. So getting information on the website and more communications either by letter or by phone.
okay, great. Yeah, thanks. That answers my question. Just as like an aside, I would like to see or recommend that in the future, urban forestry has an actual disclosure form listing out all of the details of the heritage tree and like the regulations and things, that all the rules around it. So that way there's evidence that the owner's made aware of it, instead of it just being in conversation where there's not evidence. So yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Ahinako?
It's Ihian Acho.
Thank you, sorry. My
No
apologies.
worries. So I definitely wanted to second Commissioner Nelson's and Commissioner Meisner's sentiments, and Director Cairo mentioned that they are looking for ideas of how to address it. And as in just one idea is to create a packet, like some of my other commissioners have said, maybe a mailing campaign that includes documents such as disclosure forms, information about the Heritage Tree Program, and then asking the current resident whether or not they would like their tree, which has already been designated as a heritage tree, to stay designated. So a simple yes or no. And then depending on if they say yes, it can go through that process that you've already developed to get this information on the deed. And if it's not, then maybe they can fill out a different form that then puts it into the request to remove and level set it that way. So just an idea that I'd like to share.
Thank you, Commissioner Ahinacho.
Commissioner Vandermark?
Well, one thing I would like to say is I know that we don't currently have a representative that's an active member of the UFC. So I would always recommend, if somebody feels passionate, right, the Heritage Tree Committee is a great place to get involved in some of this. And I just want to speak in support of the recommendations that have been made. These are exciting trees, and to kind of the earlier comments, it's always really exciting that folks are excited about these and want to honor them, you know, particularly at a moment that we're seeing a lot of trees that have come down or honestly are being, you know, removed. So I just want to speak in support of that. I don't want to shut down conversations if others have to share, but I would move forward with the recommendations that were presented.
question. The tree at the Learning Landscapes location, I forget the name of the school there. It's a right-of-way tree. Who's responsible for the maintenance of that tree?
Urban Forestry.
Urban Forestry, even though it's on school, because it's a right-of-way tree or because it's on school grounds?
It's not on school grounds, it's on the right of way, which is adjacent to the school.
Okay, and is Urban Forestry responsible for all right-of-way heritage trees?
Correct.
All public rights of way.
Public right-of-way, so in other words, the right-of-way in front of my residence, if it has a heritage tree, I'm responsible for it. Is that?
No, most streets in Portland are public. There are some that might be part of an HOA or something that are not. But yes, the city is responsible as per code for those.
Are there additional funds to do maintenance on more street trees that are heritage trees for urban forestry? What's the cost likely to come from that?
We have care of heritage trees on public city properties, including public rights of way, budgeted. That care is routine. We can present on that at some point if you'd like more information on it. There's a regular schedule of visiting these trees and inspecting them and performing care. I'd also like to comment in favor of the recommendations that were provided by Sam Wolf. I don't know your title. What would be your title?
Botanic specialist is my official title, but I am also, in this context, you can call me the Heritage Tree Program Manager.
All right. By the Heritage Tree Program Manager. I think that, yeah, especially with the loss of Oregon white oak, and I really appreciate including both Oregon white oaks and Western red cedars as important trees to us today, as well as everyone who's here before specifically. I think those are good trees. To note, I'm very sad to lose this weeping willow, unfortunately, but I do think that it's obvious that these trees are the ones that fell and they were removed, were done for good reason. Another thing, speaking to your comment, Commissioner, about the East Portland disparity in what heritage trees are there. One of the issues that I think are coming or would arise and be taken into consideration by the Heritage Tree Committee is that there are more common trees out there, like large Douglas fir, for example. And I think you might have the number off the top of your head, but there's like 30 Douglas fir that are really large trees. So I think that that might be a reason that not as many are approved because there's already so many. So I would say that we should perhaps encourage that the Heritage Tree Committee include more specifically where the tree is at and the size. So not just that we have 40 Douglas firs, but that neighborhood has one Douglas fir. So maybe each neighborhood should have their own heritage Douglas fir, something like that. So I think that would be a way to do that rather than the disparity being here that it was already a city 100 years ago. Out there it was farmland 100 years ago. So all the trees were removed, whereas here they were just being planted. So I do think that as these trees get larger and more exciting in terms of their species diversity, I think that will happen soon. But I definitely think that if we were to include trees that were more common, I think we'd see more out in East Portland. But yeah, so I just wanted to speak in favor of the recommendations for both the removal from the heritage tree list of the trees that have been emergency removed, as well as the trees that are up for inclusion. Thank you.
Great. Can I go back to the slide?
Mr. Meisner?
So I don't know if anyone else has any comments, but I was going to put forward a motion to go along with the recommendations for listing and delisting the heritage trees presented.
I second that motion.
Great. All in favor? Any opposed? Oh,
All in favor?
Great.
I have a question regarding the treatments of the ash trees for emerald ash borer. What was the cost of that? How long does that treatment last? How was it decided those particular trees would be treated?
Yeah. That might be a good agenda item. We have an EAB response plan that we are implementing now. The written plan isn't final yet, which is why we haven't brought it to y'all yet. And I don't know the answer to all those things off the top of my head, Commissioner Nelson. Our inoculation cycle, I believe, is on a 3-year basis. Do you know more? 3 years. 3 years. Very good. Good to have staff here. The inoculant is mectonite. What else did you want to know?
Cost.
I don't have the cost off the top of my head.
Labor and materials.
Yeah. It is, I would say this, it is less expensive, and that is in our report, to inoculate the trees that we will be inoculating than it would be to remove them.
No, I've read and heard that it's recommended that the high value ash trees, it's worth doing. So I'm just curious as to what the cost is, because we have, be ashamed to lose all of our ash trees in the city. But I'm sure we can't afford to treat all of them either.
Can't even get to some to treat them as well. I appreciate the comments, and this could be something you all would want on a future agenda. Let us know.
Order, do we also vote on these things?
The motion was for both, to approve the delisting and the listing. So
okay, well,
we covered it.
Just roll on back to my last slide then. You guys, super helpful. Thank you so much. All right, thank you, Chair and members of the UFC. I appreciate your time and attention. We will move forward with your recommendations. Let me know if there's more questions. That's it.
And I'd expected this would take a lot longer, so that is the last of our agenda items.
So I would like to bring up the topic of what is the role of the Heritage Tree Committee? Do we need to have any current urban forestry commissioners on the Heritage Tree Committee? How does Sam view the Heritage Tree Committee? Basically, that's what I would like to spend some time on. I don't know what time it is. I don't have a.
We have 5 minutes.
5?
I can
Okay.
Well, no, we have 35.
Oh, you're right, because we're not done till 11:30.
Yeah, 11:30. It's 10:50.
Yeah, we usually go to 11:30.
What chair
This hasn't happened in a long
5
time.
minutes. Then we're out of here.
Yeah. No, so I guess we can.
I was just asking Sam if she has information to present on that. So, and she has said she can present some of that.
I can present the slide I had during this last presentation.
Yeah.
Brian, can you scroll back to slide 5?
And I will say, Commissioner Nelson, because we haven't prepared for that topic, there may be things that we can't answer right now. And this has been a topic on the running list to bring back. I think we had planned to do that probably when we come back with how to navigate the 100+ trees that do not have deeds attached to their heritage tree status.
So currently, the role of the Heritage Tree Committee is as a volunteer group that supports the Heritage Tree Program Manager. They provide nominations. They provide review of those nominations. Also as a public voice during that review process. During the summer, we had a summer tour where they were able to take time out of their day to come and visit 9 different trees and visit the trees in person, and then consider as a group to move them forward or not. So the current expectation of a Heritage Tree Committee member as a community volunteer is as a support role and also as an educational and outreach support. Does that answer the question?
To start, yeah. The Heritage Tree Program came about because of the work of volunteers. One person was on the Heritage Tree, on the Urban Forestry Commission at the Jane Glazer, I think at the time in the early 90s when it first came about. It also came about because of extensive work of Friends of Trees staff that did some work in looking for trees. So the role of volunteers has been, and again, I'm not up to date. I'm only on 1993 in the archives right now, so I'm way behind. But historically, the volunteers have played a key role there. And most recently, that committee was chaired by Greg Everhart, who was a commissioner in UFC. And her understanding, mine, and it may be wrong, was that you needed to have some current UFC members on that subcommittee to make any decisions, to make any recommendations. I think there are, City Forester Cairo doesn't agree with that, and I think she has grounds when I was looking back on some of the Title 11 language. The subcommittee plays a key role in looking at the trees, and it does make recommendations via you, makes recommendations to you, and then you bring them to the committee. And so they are basically in a position of responsibility, and yet there are no existing Urban Forestry Commission members that are part of that subcommittee. There's some great people there, and there are a number of former Urban Forestry Commissioners on that committee. I think at least 3, if not 4. I don't know if Brian French is still involved. But Steve Peacock, Damon, and Greg are all former UFC commissioners. So I'm just raising that as an issue. There are great people there, but depending on how you interpret Title 11, I don't know if it can give advice.
Well, I'd be happy to come back in the future with more information for you.
Commissioner Meisner?
Thank you. My question is, how do people join the Heritage Tree Committee? Is there like a selection process that like we go to where we have to get eventually selected by city council, or is it more loose with how people join it? And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, as far as, does Urban Forestry decide who's on the committee? I was just curious about that process.
It's a great question. I think that would be a part of the future presentation. I would want to give you more detail. I have not had a situation where I've recruited anyone to the Heritage Tree Committee, so I can't give you experience with that. But my understanding is it was a rather informal recruitment, and then it went through the Heritage Tree Committee to approve. But that's all I have for that answer. So I can't give you more detail than that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Vandermark?
Well, and I don't want to speak out of turn of Jen or Brian regarding Justin's question, but it would be my understanding that urban forestry commissioners, right, have the ability to be on any of our acting. Like, I know there's a formal process for appeals, but I don't think there would be a barrier for a sitting commissioner to be involved on either heritage or like the policy committee. Is that accurate, or?
Yes, Commissioner Vandermark, that is correct. Commissioners
Okay.
are welcome to be on any committees. The appeals board, that is also internal. We just need to have a certain number. So if anyone's interested in being on the appeals board in the future, that would be great too. And likewise, commissioners are welcome, invited. We would love for you to be involved in the many other committees, such as neighborhood tree teams, and those sorts of organizations that we work with in community.
Yeah, and then my follow-up is, I know I made the request to talk about policy committee at an upcoming one, and I'm wondering if maybe we could just talk about various ways that commissioners could be engaged, to kind of to Justin's question, so folks know, like, I know we cover some of this when you first joined the commission. For me, it was 6 years ago. So I'm a bit rusty, but like people are taking in a lot of information during that. So I think maybe highlighting the various ways could be not just policy committee, but some of these other ways and what they do and what the time commitment is, et cetera, could be beneficial.
Thank you.
I had a wondering, so it's kind of becoming clear to me with the heritage tree program, why we see most of them where we do, because there's this issue we just brought up of size and where the bigger trees are in Portland. There's the issue of the uniqueness of the species to Portland, and we know that there's, you just described that there aren't as many of those unique species in East Portland, and I would guess probably like North Portland, some of those places where we also see less canopy. So it makes me wonder about what is the core mission of the Heritage Tree Program, and does that core mission make sense when we're thinking about an equitable canopy, climate change, extreme heat, all of those issues? Because I think the Heritage Tree Program could also be an opportunity to, especially for trees in the right of way where the city's taking care of them, to really ensure that there is shade for the future, right? In a way that we couldn't otherwise. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, especially since we had the couple who came to us, you know, and those issues that were raised, that I think it really brought a lot of this to the surface. So I guess my question is, if we were to revisit some of the, I'm guessing this would be a code change issue, right? Because the current code describes the Heritage Tree Program and how that gets administered. So it would need to be changed in the code, Title 11, if we wanted to change or revisit whether that makes sense the same way that it did when it was first written.
That is correct about the code. There are specifics in there about what makes a tree eligible. And things like climate action are not on that list, nor is equity.
And something we haven't brought up is the very real issue of the cost. Like, you are basically assuming probably a higher cost of tree care by listing your tree if you're a private property owner. And if we know that income is not equitably distributed across our city, so that's another barrier, I would think, to the reason why we see some neighborhoods with a lot fewer heritage trees.
And thank you for that comment. I'd like to respond a little bit to it, which is to say, wouldn't it be great if we had resources for private property tree maintenance? And as a city forester, I am ever hopeful and seeking.
That's another thing that's on my mind, is could there be a future where private property owners choose to list their tree because it then becomes the city who takes care of that tree? And that would be a huge shift, because kind of like what Commissioner Nelson has mentioned, there's like a question of, does it make sense for someone to list their tree when they lose a lot of their own control over what happens to that tree? I know I'm saying that thing that maybe we don't want to error, but like it's a real, I would be thinking about that as a homeowner. And you know, it's certainly, I think, you're thinking about folks living in rental properties. Why would a rental property owner ever do that? Right? So it could shift that conversation, and it really could address some of the equity issues in our canopy, I think. So that's something that's on my mind, and I wonder about when we might get a chance to visit some of those in the code.
I would be curious about that, kind of more something that's more detailed in terms of what you listed, because I know there's a lot of things there that could be addressed without changing the code, just kind of understanding your initial question of what's the guiding purpose for the program. But certain things I don't know would change, like tree care. If a tree is heritage or not, it's still the big tree that's there. It's still going to cost the same amount to have an arborist come out. Maybe it's going to be a little extra because you have to get the permit and the city has to say, yes, you can do this now. But as a rental, someone who rents, I have no control over the property. So I can sign every paper I want, and there's not going to be a heritage tree if it's not my property. So that is, in terms of the equity, you're still going back to the property owner trying to figure that out. But I do think that you brought up a lot of good questions, specifically if the city takes ownership of the maintenance on a heritage tree, suddenly everybody wants a heritage tree.
Well, that's my point with rentals. Exactly. It gives an incentive to the property owner, which could apply to a rental property.
Balanced with the fact that they would not be able to do, say, development and remove their tree later.
Right.
So you could basically get some amount of maintenance in perpetuity for the existence of that tree. So that'd be an interesting kind of thought process to go down. But I do think it would be very good to have that conversation and kind of see what that means, because if a tree is a heritage tree versus not a heritage tree, it doesn't change the fact that that tree exists and it's doing something. So in terms of equity, if there's a tree there, this tree's still going to do the same thing, whether or not there's a plaque on it. It just has this extra level of protection. But I think it would be worth a good long conversation with bolded kind of points to say, let's talk about this. How does that affect it? Let's talk about this. How does that affect that? I think that would be a really good agenda item for the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for recognizing me. Chair Black. I just wanted to comment on a detail of what Commissioner Clapp shared and remind folks that pruning permits are free. They are at no cost, including for heritage trees. So if there is a fee associated with a pruning for a private property tree, it is one that is levied by the one doing the pruning, by the company, not urban forestry. Planting permits and pruning permits are no cost with intention. We are required to recover costs in the city of Portland with our regulatory processes, which is why we have to put fees on certain permits, but those we have kept without. Thanks.
I would say, even though technically that's true that you're going to care for the tree either way, if it's a heritage tree, you're not going to just have your buddy with a chainsaw go. We know that happens because it's expensive. It is a barrier for people. So anyway, Commissioner Meisner.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when we think of the cost of maintaining heritage tree, we also have to recognize that if it's not a heritage tree, there are situations where even if it's a large form tree, it can be removed. And doing like a long-term cost benefit analysis, sometimes it is cheaper over the long run to remove a tree instead of keeping a tree to continually maintain it over a long period of time. This also, at least for me, it brings up not necessarily concerns. That's it. Yeah, I need it for my thoughts. Thank you.
I have to clarify cost of permits. So if they require an inspection, we do charge $50 for the application. It's kept as low as we can. There is not an inspection required. They are the cost. I'm done.
I just want to mention, thank you so much for the time and attention today. Also, if you have trees that you especially admire and would consider for a heritage tree nomination, we have a new nomination form available online. You can nominate by your smartphone, and nominations are due by May 1st. That's all I have.
I just want to note that Commissioner Lilly put in the chat that he would love a group tour of some heritage trees this summer, which is a great idea. That
I would be happy to lead that.
I was gonna say you could lead us on like a bike tour of all the heritage trees.
I'll not put it on the Petapalooza.
Yeah.
Not everyone might bite.
Heritage tree bar crawl.
That's one we probably would not put on the website.
No, it wouldn't be a public meeting.
One other thing I would just like to add, if I can, about the heritage tree, especially since 2015 after Title 11, is that it is an opt-in program. And I want to make sure to emphasize that, because all the heritage trees that we talked about today, that we've talked about since 2015, it has not been the city saying, you have a great tree, we're going to nominate it as a heritage tree. Now you have this burden that you did not want. And I think that it's important to recognize that, because as these people are opting in, they're saying, I want this tree to be protected in perpetuity as the city grows and changes, however that growth and change happens. So that is something I think that we need to also allow for those property owners to do on their property in perpetuity. Because then, as Commissioner Nelson has noted, as that changes hands, people can have different ideas. But as long as that is made up front, like what Commissioner Meisner was noting, as soon as that property is, or that heritage tree is listed on the deed, subsequently, all those property owners will understand, okay, I'm inheriting this this tree and all the things that come along with that, which ideally I think is meant to be not only a showcase of the really beautiful trees that we have, but also keeping these large big form trees that are doing the biggest, doing the most work in our urban forest in terms of shade and all the other things that come with it. I know we always talk about shade and it's the very first thing that we do, but there's a million other benefits that are uncalculable that are being discussed by researchers at the Forest Service, researchers at PSU, that are adding numbers to this that are off the charts because it's more like mental health, it's happiness, it's the idea that you're less stressed, you know. So shade is just the quick one that we can say quickly. So on the cost benefit analysis, again, what Commissioner Meisner is talking about, I would love to see that. But one thing we've talked about previously also is that we can't just, there's certain sides of the ledger that we don't have certain benefits because we don't have them here. What is the dollar for happiness, for less stress, for things like this? And we don't necessarily put the costs avoided on a certain side of the ledger. So it's really challenging. And I think that would be a fantastic thing for us to try to tackle. But I know researchers, city economists have tried to do this and we just haven't quite got there. So I think it would be an excellent thing to sit down and discuss and try to really nail down exactly, like you said, what the purpose is and know that these people are opting in for something a little bit larger and bigger than just you're getting $100 or you're saving $100 on electricity kind of thing.
Commissioner Vandermeer?
Yeah, and love having time on the agenda to talk about this stuff, y'all. So great. And it's made me realize I wanted a clarification. Like, I love JR's comment, whatever form Melinda wants, we can make happen. But I'm curious about from like if we're coming together, right? This is me doing like a antiquated Robert's Rules of Order, but like I'm realizing there would be some great things for all of us to be able to come together outside the meeting if possible. Like Casey, you were talking earlier just about the value of Oregon white oak, and there's so much cool research around it and why it's so important culturally for wildlife, for ecosystems. And I'd love for all of us to be able to come together to do more of that, and didn't know what the urban forestry commissioner requirements are of that. And
like for a quorum.
Yeah, like can we all just get together, or you know, can we like toss it out and be like, I would be happy to have somebody come talk to us on a Thursday in July. I have no idea. I just want to make certain, like, I'd rather get that up front now as a question of what our quorum requirements are.
Yeah.
Public posting?
Great question, great idea, and great question. So anytime that there is a quorum, it becomes a meeting of the Forestry Commission. And by Oregon state laws, that has to be a public meeting that has been advertised in advance as such. So here's a suggestion. Have those as agenda items here. Talk about Oregon white oak as an agenda item, for example. Alternatively, make sure that you don't have a quorum when you all get together.
And a quorum is a majority.
Yeah, six for you all, 11 folks at 6.
And it could be if we did a heritage tree walk, it just means we post it on the website, just like whenever we've done our retreats in the past. Those have technically been open to anyone. We put on the website, say this is for the UFCS meeting, you're welcome to attend and observe if you're interested. So it doesn't mean we have to meet in a room or on Zoom. We can meet elsewhere out in the world. We just need to make sure it's clear that anyone can come.
That's a good point.
So does that mean if 5 of us went to a wedding, it would need to be posted at the website?
Not 5, 6.
6, if 6 of us went, I mean, even if there's no.
I mean, I think there's like it's sort of like the safe assumption, because there's a chance you get to be discussing UFC business, in which case you're outside of the public meetings laws. Yeah, I think maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room for something as explicitly not commission related, but yeah, generally that's the way the law is interpreted. Yeah, I mean, like members of city council often don't go to the same social event or public event based on the numbers that are going to be attending because of this same issue. Yeah.
Seems like an overreaction to the corruption of the 60s.
Wasn't around those days.
Commissioner Meisner?
Yeah, thank you. I know we've talked about it in the past, but I still think it'd be great if we could also do a walking tour to look at areas where they've successfully balanced protecting trees as well as dense building. I know like last time we talked about the New Columbia.
I was gonna say,
So
yeah.
I'm still open and would like to do like a walking tour to see that as an example of how to balance protecting trees and dense building. And there are also a couple heritage trees there as well, just to throw that out there.
Yes, I love that. Do they go to?
It's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, that would be a really cool thing to open to the public, to just say, here's examples of how this can look when we plan this way.
Yeah, we could even have New Columbia is be a really interesting one. Be great to have someone from a planning sustainability to come as well, because I know there was something about, I'm gonna get the specifics wrong, but there's something about the way that it was platted that there are actual areas where trees are required. It's like on the deed, and the way of incorporating trees for the long term into the design of the buildings and the neighborhood there. So a lot of interesting things that were done well there, I think.
What is the name of this?
New Columbia. It's in the Portsmouth neighborhood. Yeah.
Lombard, also.
Okay.
About 8 blocks north of St. John's.
Gotcha. Okay.
And actually with some of the maps, which you will see, I think at the next meeting, when we have a lot of time to talk about our urban forest plan update, maps we've seen on canopy change, New Columbia really stands out as positive change while being more dense than the surrounding area. So some interesting things there.
Charles Street Community Center.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Just
Okay. All right. I think that's a wrap, which is 10 minutes early.
Not bad. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Plack, for stepping in at the last moment. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Sorry to spring that.
you see, you sat in the chair. That was your mistake.
I know.